Chapter 3382, Chapter 456, First Step, Stepping Space. Chapter 3382, Chapter 456, First Step, Stepping Space. Chapter 456, First Step, Stepping Space. Aren't we in the Eternal Realm? Unrestrained Lionheart couldn't help but rub his eyes when he saw Chiffon dancing and evading a combat puppet's attacks in mid-air. In the Eternal Realm, even Tier 5 experts were incapable of flight. Yet, Chiffon, a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, had accomplished this feat at this time. Unrestrained Lionheart wasn't the only one finding this situation unbelievable. Death Omen, Thousand Scars, and White Owl, who were more familiar with Chiffon, couldn't help but be astonished by what they were seeing. How is he doing it? Death Omen was greatly confused as she watched Chiffon rapidly move across the air. As a former Tier 6 assassin, Death Omen was more knowledgeable regarding speed and body techniques than anyone present. The reason Tier 4 players could fly was mainly due to the transformation of their mana. Because of their stronger mana, Tier 4 players could manipulate a much larger amount of ambient mana in their surrounding environment, which, in turn, allowed them to create an invisible pair of mana wings to achieve flight. However, the Eternal Realm's environment contained not just mana but also holy power. Meanwhile, the influence holy power had over mana made it incredibly difficult for players to manipulate the ambient mana around them reliably. Hence, even Tier 5 players were incapable of flight in the Eternal Realm. If players wished to fly in the Eternal Realm, they would have to create a divine body and reach Tier 6. At that time, they would have a frightening amount of mana in their bodies, and they could create a pair of mana wings for themselves even without manipulating ambient mana. However, no matter how much Death Omen focused her senses, she couldn't sense any fluctuations coming from Chiffon or the ambient mana around him. Yet, Chiffon had clearly changed directions 3 times in mid-air, his feet never touching the ground throughout the process. Moreover, he had accomplished this feat so quickly that he was already close to catching up to the Tier 4 players outside the Eternal Realm. Did he learn how to use it already? Unlike everyone else, Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja had an idea of how Chiffon was flying, and they couldn't help but gape at this realization. A monster. They couldn't think of a more fitting description to describe Chiffon. The man's learning capabilities were simply monstrous. The 3 of them had already memorized the movements involved in the Goddess of Space's gold body technique. Hence, they knew how challenging it was to execute the technique. Even though the 3 of them were only half a step away from reaching the Beyond Domain realm, it was still incredibly challenging for them to execute the technique at a crude level, let alone execute it smoothly. The series of movements involved in flowing space made use of every aspect available in space. In a certain sense, the combat technique was a way of utilizing the Domain Realm's principles to the extremes. Upon reaching the Domain Realm, players could perceive everything around them up to a certain range. Meanwhile, every improvement they achieved in the Domain Realm would raise the clarity of their perception. When players reached the Domain Realm's 3rd step, their perception was already clear enough for them to stand in the middle of a rain and count the raindrops present within their vicinity. They could even pinpoint the location of specific raindrops if they wanted. Meanwhile, flowing space made full use of this extraordinary perception to determine the flow of wind and the various particles present in the user's vicinity. Then, through subtle movements across the entire body, the user of flowing space would move through the path of least resistance while simultaneously compressing small patches of air around them to create spatial tension, which, in turn, allowed the user to achieve flight. Of course, flowing space didn't just allow users to add an extra dimension to their combat. The technique's explosive movements also allowed users to double their speed or more. Incredible. Truly incredible. No wonder flowing space can rank among the top 3 of all gold body techniques. Chiffon was in awe as he evaded the combat puppet's attacks. Even though my movements are still clumsy, I can still move in mid-air, and the speed I can achieve is already on par with advanced silver body technique. Meanwhile, with each subsequent use of flowing space, Chiffon became increasingly familiar with the technique, and the amount of time he could stay in the air also became increasingly longer. Currently, the team was fighting against a group of more than 30 combat puppets, and every one of these combat puppets was a legendary monster with 150 billion HP. In addition to the team's tanks, Every other melee player of the team was also assigned to tank a combat puppet. Even 5th floor magical class experts like Unrestrained Lionheart and Fry had to take on one by themselves. This was so that the team's ranged damage dealers could focus on killing the combat puppets one at a time. That should be enough practice against one combat puppet. When Shifeng stopped feeling pressure from facing just one combat puppet, he swiftly aggroed the combat puppets that Unrestrained Lionheart and Fry were facing. He intended to test his limits with 3 combat puppets. Is he crazy? Fry was rendered speechless when he saw Shifeng trying to take on 3 combat puppets by himself. The combat puppets in the courtyard of space were legendary monsters with extraordinary combat capabilities. Even as a Tier 5 player, Fry could, at most, take on 2 by herself. Shifeng was currently only a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. He might have Tier 5 basic attributes, but tanking one combat puppet should already be his limit. In fact, it was already amazing he could keep up with the combat puppet's attacks. After all, it took White Owl, a Tier 5 Divine Rune Warrior, her all just to defend against the attacks of one combat puppet. She couldn't even launch any attacks of her own against the combat puppet. Meanwhile, things played out exactly as Fry anticipated. As soon as Shifeng had to go up against 3 combat puppets simultaneously, he immediately fell into a passive state, unable to find any opportunities to attack. He even had to resort to blocking attacks using both his swords, something he had never done previously. After all, blocking any attack from the combat puppet would result in him getting sent flying over a dozen yards and losing over 1/5 of his HP. 1 minute. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. After butting heads with the combat puppets and getting sent flying numerous times, Shifeng gradually reduced the frequency in which he got sent flying. Initially, he would be forced to block an attack every 2 or 3 seconds. However, as his execution of flowing space smoothened, he was able to gradually increase the interval to 20 seconds and more. When the battle crossed the 1-hour mark, the team had already slain over 20 combat puppets. However, just as everyone thought the battle would soon end, another group of 32 combat puppets suddenly emerged from the distance and charged at the team. Not good. All tanks activate your life-saving skills and intercept those monsters. Fry hurriedly commanded through the team chat. Immediately, the team's Tier 5 tanks stopped conserving their strength and activated their respective Tier 5 life-saving skills. The life-saving skills came in all shapes and forms. Some increased HP and defense, some increased strength, defense, and speed, and some reduced the damage the user received. Because of these life-saving skills, the 10 Tier 5 tanks managed to pin down 30 out of the 32 new combat puppets in no time. Brother Black Flame, be careful. Desolate Fury shouted when he saw the remaining 2 combat puppets getting attracted by Shifeng's fight. Shifeng was already busy fighting against 3 combat puppets. If 2 more joined the fray, he would definitely be killed. Unfortunately, Desolate Fury's reminder was useless as the 2 new combat puppets reached Shifeng in no time and promptly sent a flurry of punches at Shifeng, their rapid attacks making it look like a wall of fists was closing in on Shifeng. Meanwhile, when Shifeng saw the numerous punches coming at him, a sense of powerlessness filled him. While looking at the 2 combat puppets' joint attack, Shifeng suddenly gained inspiration and changed his footwork. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Shifeng started stepping on the oncoming punches, his actions accelerating his already incredible speed even further. Moreover, even when the wall of punches looked like it had collided with Shifeng's body, Shifeng did not receive even a single point of damage. At the same time, the sound of a system notification rang in Shifeng's ears. System, congratulations. You have learned the gold combat technique flowing space. Rewarding 1 level and a permanent 10% increase in reaction speed. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3383, Chapter 457, Goddess's First Appearance. Chapter 3383, Chapter 457, Goddess's First Appearance. Chapter 457, Goddess's First Appearance. How can such an out-of-this-world body technique exist? This is insane. A Tier 4 Sword Emperor is tanking 5 legendary monsters solo? Even saints shouldn't be able to pull off such a stunt. No wonder the Vice Guild leader is willing to pay such a high price to hire him. If Elder Parker finds out about this, he'll probably die of regret. Everyone was greatly shocked as they watched Shifeng taking on 5 combat puppets while staying in the air. Although their team had less than 100 members because of Parker and company's betrayal, Shifeng had single-handedly made up for the 12 missing players. This situation was both unbelievable and frightening. It should be known that a Tier 5 metric tons with a Tier 5 life-saving skill active could, at best, take on 5 combat puppets simultaneously. Moreover, it would only be for a very limited time. Yet, Shifeng, a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, had accomplished this feat without the use of any life-saving skills. Meanwhile, Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja were greatly excited by this situation. This body technique is simply incredible. Cross wore a fervent look as he watched Shifeng's fight. If I can successfully learn it as well, I can fight against even extrasensory realm expert. La Roja also shared similar thoughts, her eyes full of surprise and hope. Previously, she only knew that the Courtyard of Space's hostile environment was actually a gold combat technique's legacy in disguise. However, she had no idea exactly how powerful this gold combat technique was. However, after seeing Shifeng transforming the sky into his battlefield, something which should be impossible to accomplish in the Eternal Realm, she quickly understood the value of the flowing space technique. The boost in combat power this combat technique could provide to players in the Eternal Realm was utterly immense. It was especially so for rangers like herself. If she could monopolize the skies while her opponents were stuck on the ground, she was confident she could fight against even 5th-floor experts. So, this is a gold combat technique? Compared to La Roja and the others, Shifeng was even more excited by flowing space's effectiveness. In addition to letting him sprint in mid-air, the technique also drastically boosted his speed on the ground. If he wanted to, every step he took on the ground could propel him across great distances instantaneously and leave over a dozen afterimages in his wake. This situation thoroughly renewed his opinion of flowing space and gold combat techniques altogether. In his previous life, Shifeng never got to learn a gold combat technique. The strongest technique he managed to learn was the Holy Annihilation Mana technique. Now that he had successfully learned one, he finally understood how frightening gold combat techniques could be. He also understood exactly how powerful the Goddess of Space's gold body technique was. Even though his mastery of flowing space only reached the stepping space standard, not only did he gain a permanent 10% boost in reaction speed, but he also gained a huge boost in his movement speed and nimbleness while executing the technique. He was at least twice as fast and nimble than when he was outside the Eternal Realm. As icing on the cake, he also gained the ability to fly in the Eternal Realm. So long as he didn't run out of stamina and concentration, he could remain in flight for as long as he wanted. With all these benefits, even if he didn't wield a legendary weapon, he was confident he could hold his ground against a dragon of the same tier. Meanwhile, outside the Courtyard of Space, 9 hours after the World Mode Courtyard of Space's activation, streams of light appeared outside the teleportation gate, the light revealing the silhouette of human players as they faded. Damn it! Damn it all! Morrow cursed as he glared at the dark pillar of light rising from the teleportation gate. Parker, who was teleported out of the Courtyard of Space with Morrow, also wore an ugly look, his face looking like it had aged by more than a decade. Ha ha ha. That's one more team annihilated. And it's even a team from the Red Dragon Nation this time. The Red Dragon Nation's team might be strong, but it's a pity that the God Mode Courtyard of Space is unlike any of the other God Mode team dungeons we've seen before. Indeed. I heard that even a team of 100 Tier 5 experts from the Holy Race's side has gotten annihilated. Originally, the Courtyard of Space's outside was supposed to be embroiled in a battle involving only a couple of thousand players. Currently, though, no fights were taking place around the teleportation gate. Players from both the human race and the holy race were merely resting, and neither side intended to fight. Moreover, the number of players outside the Courtyard of Space had increased to several tens of thousands. And if one looked carefully, one would find that some of these players belonged to the teams that had previously entered the God Mode Courtyard of Space. Now that we've failed to raid the God Mode Courtyard of Space, what should we do next, Lord Morrow? Desert Web tentatively asked as he looked at Morrow, who was clearly in a terrible mood. After scanning the area and pondering for a moment, Morrow said, "We wait." The God Mode courtyard of space's difficulty was beyond his imagination. The dungeon's final boss was absurdly tough, gradually exhausting and eradicating his team. Meanwhile, teams that had suffered annihilation in a God Mode team dungeon could only re-enter the dungeon after the weekly cooldown period. "We're waiting." Anxiously, Desert Web said, "But the Blood Hell mountain range would have already activated by the time the cooldown finishes." "Of course, we won't wait for that long," Morrow said as he looked at the World Mode courtyard of space's teleportation gate. Then, he sneered and continued, "I just checked, and not only is Fry's team not here, but my friends list shows that she is still online. This proves that her team is still inside. Otherwise, the various powers experts here would have long since eliminated her team." "Do you mean to wait for Vice Guild leader Fry's team to come out?" Desert Web's eyes lit up when he heard Morrow's words. Currently, there were very few teams with the strength necessary to challenge the World Mode courtyard of space. This was because 99% of the raid teams that had previously gathered to raid the courtyard of space had entered the dungeon's God Mode difficulty. Out of the human teams gathered, the only one that managed to enter World Mode was Fry's team. The courtyard of space's God Mode difficulty was already challenging beyond belief. So, one could easily imagine how challenging World Mode would be. If the teams present wished to successfully raid the World Mode courtyard of space once their respective cooldown periods were over, they would need plenty of information regarding the World Mode dungeon. Meanwhile, Fry's team was undoubtedly the best source of information. It was also why so many people were gathered here. Everyone was waiting for the players that had entered the World Mode courtyard of space to obtain information relating to the World Mode dungeon. Of course, these players had the option to not share any information, but if that was the case, there would only be one outcome awaiting them: death. Inside the World Mode courtyard of space's castle area, a team of 88 players arrived at a double door leading into the central hall on the castle's top floor. The doors were made of unknown material, and divine patterns giving off a primordial presence engraved on them. The doors emanated a frightening mental oppression that could easily cause ordinary Tier 4 experts to shudder. When the players walked up to the double door, the doors slowly parted to reveal the central hall and two figures standing inside the hall. Upon seeing these two figures, the players couldn't help but be shocked. An ancient god's aura. How is this possible? The goddess of space. Inside the central hall that was as wide as 4 sport stadiums, two figures measuring over 10 meters in height stood in the middle. Of these two figures, one was male, while the other was female. Both figures radiated divine might so powerful that even Tier 6 players would subconsciously back away. The woman in the hall was especially imposing. Even though the woman was just standing still, it felt like she was the master of the courtyard of space. Even the mana in everyone's body was seemingly compelled to flow toward the woman. At the same time as Shafeng and the others discovered this woman, the woman in question also noticed their presence. Suddenly, she vanished from where she stood and reappeared in front of Shafeng's group, her spontaneous appearance making it seem as if she had always been standing in front of the group. TL notes, just a reminder that extrasensory realm equals beyond domain realm. When players reach this realm, they become able to utilize their sixth sense more effectively, allowing them to predict dangers and take appropriate countermeasures. Realms of Refinement. 1. Refinement Realm, better control of subtle movements. 2. Flowing Water Realm, better at piecing moves together to smoothen maneuvers. 3. Void Realm, can't remember what this is. I think it has something to do with having better perception. 4. Domain Realm, 3 steps, asterisk, vastly improved perception. 5. Beyond Domain Realm Extrasensory Realm, improved sixth sense effectiveness. Asterisk Domain Realm is different from Mana Domain. Mana Domain is something gained through having superior control over mana. Thus far, Mana Domain has 2 stages, Mana Domain and World Creation. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3384, Chapter 458, Holy Ancestor. Chapter 3384, Chapter 458, Holy Ancestor. Chapter 458, Holy Ancestor. Unrestrained Lionheart's expression paled as he looked at the giant of a woman standing before him. Then, he looked to Shifeng and wryly smiled, saying, "Mr. Black Flame, I think we received a little more than what we bargained for." The inside of the hall was shrouded in mist, so they couldn't determine the woman's appearance and strength just now. However, that was no longer the case now that the woman was standing right in front of them. Although the woman's blue-rimmed white hood prevented them from seeing her face, the sight of the woman's stats bewildered everyone. Goddess's Shadow, Ancient God's Doppelganger, Tier 6, Level 240 HP? Level 240? Is this really just a doppelganger? At this time, White Owl, Death Omen, and Thousand Scars similarly experienced despair. The three of them previously had the fortune of seeing an ancient god in person in the miniature Ancient Worlds World Passage. So, they could tell that in terms of presence, the goddess's shadow before them was much stronger than even the ancient god they met in the World Passage. Under normal circumstances, even a team of Tier 6 experts would have to flee if they encountered this goddess's shadow, let alone a bunch of Tier 5 players like themselves. After all, the goddess's shadow's level of 240 was a height most Tier 6 players in the greater god's domain struggled to reach. Not to mention, as an ancient god, the goddess's shadow possessed a life rating vastly superior to dragons of the same tier. The goddess of space truly is an existence that has surpassed primordial gods. Standing before the goddess's shadow, Shifeng also experienced unprecedented pressure. Right now, it felt like he was standing in front of a real ancient god rather than a mere doppelganger. It should be known that doppelgangers in God's domain would always be much weaker than the main body. Normally, a Tier 6 god's doppelganger would only be at the Tier 5 standard. The doppelganger's life rating would also be inferior to an actual god. At most, a god's doppelganger would have life rating rivaling four-winged Valkyries. Yet, the goddess's shadow's life rating reached the standard of ancient gods. With this doppelganger's level and life rating, even if it was only at Tier 5, it would still be impossible for their team to defeat it. Just as everyone thought their raid had come to an end, the goddess's shadow suddenly spoke up. After all this time, someone has finally come. Indifferently looking at Shifeng's group, the goddess's shadow asked, "Can I ask you all to lend me a helping hand?" "A helping hand? May I know what you require us to do, esteemed goddess?" Shifeng curiously asked. In terms of combat power, the goddess's shadow definitely stood among the very apex of the greater god's domain. Even apex powers would have difficulty slaying it. So, Shifeng found it hard to believe the goddess's shadow would need their help. Simple. "I need you to extinguish the ancient god over there. Otherwise, it won't be long before he breaks out of his seal and terrorize the greater god's domain," the goddess's shadow said. "Kill him?" Shifeng couldn't help but turn to the figure standing in the middle of the hall. At this time, the mist in the hall gradually dissipated, revealing a figure restrained by dozens of translucent chains. There were faint purple-gold divine runes flashing on the chains, the runes giving every chain a tyrannical divine might. Rather than inanimate objects, it felt as if every one of these chains was a Tier 6 god. Shifeng couldn't help but grow confused as he looked at the gigantic man in the middle of the hall. From what Shifeng recalled, the world mode courtyard of space's final boss should be a four-winged Tier 6 archangel, an existence with a life rating superior to Valkyries and close to matching ordinary dragons of the same tier. Basically, teams needed to defeat a monster that was about as strong as a Tier 6 dragon. The only difference was that, unlike dragons that relied on having a powerful physique and access to draconic magic for their strength, archangels relied on combat techniques and weapons for their strength. This made archangels much more difficult to deal with for ordinary teams. As for the goddess's shadow's existence and request, Shifeng had never heard about these things existing in his previous life. What surprised Shifeng even more was the man restrained in the hall. Silver runes covered the man's entire body, and Shifeng was incredibly familiar with these runes. A member of the holy race. Indeed, the man restrained in the hall was a Tier 6 holy god. Moreover, the man wasn't any ordinary Tier 6 god. Seeing how the man was covered in holy runes, the man was most likely a holy ancestor. A holy ancestor. Out of the many holy gods that existed among the holy race, those who could be regarded as holy ancestors were few and far between. Meanwhile, their existence was akin to the greater god's domain's primordial gods. So, when Shifeng heard that the goddess's shadow's request was for them to kill a holy ancestor, he couldn't help but feel as if the other party was joking with them. Manoset, holy ancestor, tier? Level? HP? Seemingly noticing everyone's concerns, the goddess's shadow said, "Do not worry. I will use my power to weaken him. He won't be able to exert more than 10% of his strength. With your strength, you should be strong enough to fight him." As soon as the goddess's shadow finished speaking, a series of system notifications rang in everyone's ears. System, congratulations. You have triggered the world-ranked event Goddess of Space's seal. Assist the goddess's shadow in killing the holy ancestor. System, you are advised to challenge the Goddess of Space's seal event with everything you have. Failure to complete the event will lead to massive changes throughout the greater god's domain. You will also be dealt with using the most severe punishment. A world-ranked event. Kill the holy ancestor? What's going on here? Unrestrained Lionheart and the others froze when they heard the content of the system notifications. Whether it was the world-ranked event or the holy ancestor, neither were things they had heard of before. Even so, they could still determine the severity of the situation based on the information they understood. Everyone present had seen how powerful the holy race's players were, so they couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful a god from the holy race could be. Subsequently, before Shifeng, the leader of the team, could make a response to the goddess's shadow's request for help, the other party suddenly vanished. Then, the goddess's shadow reappeared in the air in the middle of the hall and chanted a series of obscure divine incantations. Immediately afterward, over 1,000 magic arrays appeared all over the hall, every magic array being a threefold magic array exceeding the great grandmaster rank. Suddenly, the divine runes on the chains binding the holy ancestor glowed as they rapidly sapped his strength. However, even as the holy ancestor was growing weaker, not only did he not feel upset, but he even started to smile. At the same time, terrifying bursts of holy power spread across the entire courtyard of space. Ha ha ha. Space. Did you honestly think I've made no preparations throughout all these years? Manoset said, laughing. Then, he coldly swept his gaze across Shifeng's group and continued, "Pitiful adventurers, today will mark the end of your lives." As soon as Manoset finished speaking, the chains binding him started to break one after another. Meanwhile, with every chain that broke, Manoset's aura also grew in intensity. At one point, his mere presence had caused the entire castle to tremble. Shifeng and the others also found themselves unable to move their bodies. Die. After breaking out of the chains restraining his arms, Manoset swung his fist in the direction of Shifeng's group. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3385, Chapter 459, Surpassing Dragons. Chapter 3385, Chapter 459, Surpassing Dragons. Chapter 459, Surpassing Dragons. When Manoset threw his punch, even the hall's sturdy space instantly turned into a dark void. Not only did this void devour all mana caught within its vicinity, but it also caused time to slow down to a standstill. As a result, Shifeng and every other player present could not move. Moreover, apart from Shifeng, Fry, Unrestrained Lionheart, and a few other experts on the team, everyone else experienced a lag in their thoughts. It's over. So, this is the strength of a holy ancestor. Fry and Unrestrained Lionheart were greatly shocked when they saw the destruction happening before their very eyes. Tier 6 gods were very rarely seen in the greater god's domain, but as a pseudo-apex power, the Red Dragon Nation had plenty of video information on Tier 6 gods. The guild even had quite a few video recordings of ancient gods in battle. However, out of all the gods and ancient gods recorded in the Red Dragon Nation's archives, not even the strongest ancient god could throw out a punch as powerful as Manoset's. Incredible. This punch is already as strong as a primordial god's attack. Shifeng was also greatly surprised by Manoset's devastating punch. Shifeng had fought against many holy gods during his previous life, but never had he come across a holy ancestor before. So, this was his first encounter with a holy ancestor. Even in the holy race's world, few records were available on holy ancestors. As far as Shifeng was aware, no human player had come across a holy ancestor during his previous life, and all everyone knew was that holy ancestors were existences rivaling primordial gods. Meanwhile, it should be known that Manoset was currently in a sealed state. Even though he had already broken free of the chains binding him, his strength remained sealed, and he'd be fortunate if he could even unleash 30% of his actual strength. Yet, even with just 30% of his strength, Manoset could already throw a punch rivaling that of primordial gods. While Shifeng was marveling at Manoset's punch, the shock that Fry and unrestrained Lionheart experienced gradually turned into despair. A primordial god's attack simply wasn't something Tier 5 players could withstand. Even fragmented legendary items would be reduced to dust if struck by a primordial god's attack. So long as they were killed by it, they would most certainly see their immortal souls extinguished. However, when Manoset's fist was just 10 yards away from reaching Shifeng's group, the goddess's shadow, who was in the middle of chanting an incantation, suddenly waved her hand. Boom! An explosion shook the entire courtyard of space, the shockwaves of the explosion causing the courtyard's environment to crack like glass. If another such explosion occurred, the courtyard's environment would most certainly shatter, and everything within the courtyard would perish. Back inside the castle's top-floor hall. We're alive. We're not dead. The players in the hall couldn't help but be surprised as they inspected their bodies. Although most of the players present had failed to see what had just happened, they weren't fools. Time in the hall had yet to freeze the instant Manoset swung his fist, so everyone understood that there was no way any of them could have survived an attack from the holy ancestor. While everyone was wrapped in confusion, several thoroughly translucent barriers before them shattered and disappeared one after another. When the fifth barrier disappeared, and cracks started to appear on the sixth one, Manoset's fist came to a complete stop. Am I dreaming? A six-fold world wall? Unrestrained Lionheart nearly dropped his staff when he saw the barriers that had just shattered, and he couldn't help but look toward the goddess's shadow. Is she really just a doppelganger? World Wall was a Tier 6 defensive spell. It was also the strongest defensive spell available at Tier 6. Normally, even a Tier 6 expert at the 5th floor standard could, at best, silent cast a one-fold World Wall. And if they chanted the spell's incantation, they could cast a two-fold World Wall. Yet, the goddess's shadow had constructed a six-fold World Wall with just a wave of her hand. Normally, this was a feat an ancient god would find extremely difficult to accomplish even with their true bodies. Die. Manoset was unfazed even after seeing his first attack failing to connect. Without hesitation, he began throwing out a barrage of devastating punches, the punches so numerous that it looked like a wall of fists was approaching Shifeng's group. The players present were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. A gold combat technique? Impossible. How can an NPC use a gold combat technique? How are we supposed to even fight against such an NPC? Of those present, Fry and unrestrained Lionheart were especially shocked when they saw the barrage of punches. With their vast knowledge of God's domain, they immediately understood that Manoset had just executed a gold combat technique. It should be known that NPCs typically possessed much greater basic attributes than players. They also had higher combat standards than monsters, with many Tier 6 NPCs having combat standards at the 4th floor standard. Because of these factors, very few Tier 6 players could rival Tier 6 gods, and a large number of Tier 6 experts were necessary to take down a Tier 6 god under normal circumstances. However, if a Tier 6 god knew how to use gold combat techniques on top of having greater basic attributes than players and greater combat standards than monsters, defeating them would be nigh impossible for players. Seal. Just as the barrage of punches was about to reach Shifeng's group, a divine voice suddenly echoed in everyone's mind. Immediately afterward, the wall of fists gradually disappeared. Damn it, space. You cannot stop me. Manoset yelled out in pain and fury. Subsequently, countless divine runes appeared around Manoset, locking down the space within a 100-yard radius of the holy ancestor. Then, these divine runes started to resonate with the remaining chains on Manoset's body and sap away at his strength. Primordial God. Tier 6 Ancient God. Tier 6 God. The instant Manaset's life rating fell to the Tier 5 standard, the brightness of the divine runes around him peaked, and Manaset's strength stopped falling. Ha ha ha. Is this the limit of your doppelganger? Manaset laughed when he saw the goddess's shadow's body destabilizing. Or do you think these ants can defeat me just because I've been weakened to Tier 5? Manaset's mockery did not earn any reaction from the goddess's shadow. Instead, the goddess shadow merely turned to the hall's entrance and said to Shifeng's group, "The rest is up to you now. I have already suppressed Manaset to the best of my abilities, but I can only maintain this suppression for a limited time." After saying so, the goddess's shadow closed her eyes and focused all her attention on maintaining Manaset's seal. She wants us to fight that. When everyone looked at the weakened holy ancestor, they couldn't help but reveal a wry smile. Manaset, Holy Ancestor, Tier 5, Level 148 HP 1,500,000,000,000. It was true that Manaset had been weakened to the Tier 5 standard, but simply looking at Manaset's HP was enough to tell them how frighteningly powerful Manaset was still. Even a dragon of the same tier would be put to shame when compared to the Holy Ancestor. Before everyone could come to terms with the situation, Manaset swung his fist at the team once again. Compared to before, Manaset's punch this time was much less frightening. Even so, it still carried power at the Tier 6 standard, and it was strong enough to distort the surrounding space. Before Manaset's punch could reach the team, a Tier 5 Demidragon Shield Warrior intercepted it. The Demidragon Shield Warrior was the tank that had previously received the Orichalcum secret treasure from Fry. After he let out a roar, his shield transformed into multiple barriers of light that continuously redirected and weakened Manaset's punch. One of the 99 absolute techniques, Skylight Guardian. Boom. Subsequently, the Demidragon Shield Warrior was sent flying and crashing into a wall, his shield falling out of his hands and his HP decreasing by over 80%. Crest. Unrestrained Lionheart was greatly shocked by this development. Crest was their team's ace tank. Not only did he wield a top-tier fragmented legendary shield close to rivaling legendary shields, but he also had the Orichalcum secret treasure equipped. Combined with the absolute technique Skylight Shield, even if he blocked an attack from a Tier 6 divine monster, he shouldn't lose more than 30% of his HP. Yet, now, not only did Manaset's attack put Crest into a heavily injured state, but the Shield Warrior had also lost over 80% of his HP. How were they supposed to fight against such a powerful foe? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3386, Chapter 460, Tier 6 Super Spell. Chapter 3386, Chapter 460, Tier 6 Super Spell. Chapter 460, Tier 6 Super Spell. How is this possible? When everyone saw Crest collapse, the shock they experienced was many times greater than when they first saw the Holy Ancestor. Previously, everyone still lacked a clear concept of Manaset's strength since they didn't have any knowledge regarding the existence of Holy Ancestors. It was similar to how they lacked a clear understanding of the strength of primordial gods since they had only ever read about them in historical records. However, after seeing Manaset getting weakened to the Tier 5 standard and still nearly killing Crest in one hit, everyone finally understood just how powerful the Holy Ancestor was. It should be known that Crest was a 5th floor expert, an existence standing at the greater god's domain's apex. With his combat techniques and fragmented legendary items, he could tank Tier 6 monsters even as a Tier 5 player. With a tank like Crest, a team of several dozen Tier 5 experts could even slay Tier 6 monsters of the same level. This was also why Fry dared to challenge the God Mode Courtyard of Space in the first place. It really is a gold combat technique. Is the main god system playing a joke on us? When Desolate Fury saw that Crest could no longer move his arms, he couldn't help but despair a little. Previously, Desolate Fury still wasn't certain if Manaset had used a gold combat technique. But now, he was certain. As a Tier 5 tank himself, Desolate Fury knew better than anyone how difficult it was to damage a tank like Crest to such an extent. Not only could fragmented legendary shields neutralize a significant amount of damage their wielders received, but they could also dampen the force of attacks blocked to a significant extent. After taking into account that Crest had used a combat technique to redirect Manoset's attack, the actual force that was transferred from Manoset's fist to Crest's shield shouldn't exceed 10%. Manoset might have astonishing basic attributes, but they were only at the standard of ordinary Tier 6 divine monsters. With Crest's basic attributes that were close to reaching the Tier 6 standard, there was no way a Tier 6 divine monster could heavily injure him. The only explanation Desolate Fury could come up with for this situation was that Manoset had used a gold combat technique. It should be known that players who mastered a gold combat technique could transcend tiers and rank among the apex of the greater god's domain. So, just how were they supposed to fight against a Tier 6 monster that had mastered a gold combat technique? Mr. Black Flame, I'm afraid we can't beat this monster. No matter how I look at it, I just can't see us overcoming his gold combat technique, Unrestrained Lionheart said, wryly smiling when he saw Manoset ignoring them to target the goddess's shadow instead. Gold combat technique? Shifeng chuckled when he heard Unrestrained Lionheart's words. What he's using isn't a gold combat technique. It might look like Manoset had just used a gold combat technique, but the move didn't have anything to do with combat techniques. Instead, what the Holy Ancestor used was a holy art unique to the holy race. Holy Aura was a method for players to enhance their raw offensive and defensive capabilities using holy power, whereas holy arts were essentially the evolution of Holy Aura. Or, more specifically, they were special methods of using Holy Aura. Meanwhile, similar to combat techniques, holy arts could be categorized into bronze, silver, and gold ranks. Hearing Shifeng's response, Unrestrained Lionheart shook his head and smiled, saying, even if what he used isn't a gold combat technique, it still doesn't change our situation. It will take at least a few Tier 6 players to take him down. The many 5th floor experts standing nearby nodded in agreement. It simply wasn't feasible for Tier 5 players like them to fight against an existence like Manoset. Not really. We don't need multiple Tier 6 players. After pondering for a moment, Shifeng said, if we can have one Tier 6 combatant to distract him, defeating him isn't out of the question. Holy arts were different from combat techniques. In terms of improvements, holy arts provided a more well-rounded improvement, whereas combat techniques provided more extreme improvements. For example, some combat techniques might increase only the user's offensive capabilities, some might only increase defensive capabilities, etc. Only through such extreme improvements could gold combat techniques let users transcend tiers. This also meant that gold holy arts couldn't let users transcend tiers. Is what you said true? Fry asked as she looked at Shifeng with a serious gaze. Can we truly raid this boss if we have a Tier 6 combatant? Vice Guild Leader, could it be that you, Unrestrained Lionheart panicked when he heard Fry's words? Even though Fry hadn't revealed her intentions, he could already guess where she was going with her words. But that's your last trump card for competing against the other Vice Guild leaders, it doesn't matter. If we get annihilated here, I will be doomed regardless, Fry said to Unrestrained Lionheart, shaking her head. Then, she returned her focus to Shifeng and asked, how confident are you, Guild Leader Black Flame? If no accidents occur, we have a 50% chance of succeeding, Shifeng answered. Although the World Mode Courtyard of Space's final boss turned out different from what he heard, in a situation where Manoset could not move from where he stood, defeating him wasn't exactly impossible. After all, he had slain plenty of Tier 6 holy gods during his previous life. Slaying a Tier 5 holy ancestor who was partially immobilized shouldn't be too difficult. 50%. Fry was surprised by Shifeng's answer. Then, she smiled and said, okay. I'll place my bet on you. After saying so, Fry raised the staff she wielded and chanted an incantation. Immediately, a silver, 5-fold magic array appeared under Fry's feet, the magic array taking up over half of the hall. Subsequently, Fry's aura rapidly weakened, her soul falling into a weakened state in no time. At the same time, the 5-fold magic array began to release a frightening aura. A dragon. Amazing. Vice Guild Leader Fry is simply amazing. This is a Tier 5 dragon we are talking about. Everyone was shocked when they saw the gigantic figure emerging from the 5-fold magic array. Is this dragon soul summoning one of Nethersoul's 3 rumored abilities? Shifeng was similarly astonished by the sight of the dragon emerging from the magic array. Ghost Dragon, Legendary, Level 141 210 billion. The divine weapon Nethersoul came attached with 3 Tier 6 super spells that surpassed even Tier 6 curses. Although Dragon Soul summoning could only summon the soul of a dragon and not a living dragon, it was still plenty frightening. At the very least, the ghost dragon before him definitely possessed combat power at the Tier 6 standard. Go. After summoning the ghost dragon, Fry promptly commanded it to attack Manoset. Annoying pest. When Manoset saw the ghost dragon swiping its claw at him, he removed his focus from the goddess's shadow and threw a wall of punches at the immediate threat. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3387, Chapter 461, Matching a Holy Ancestor. Chapter 3387, Chapter 461, Matching a Holy Ancestor. Chapter 461, Matching a Holy Ancestor. When Fry looked at the countless oncoming fists, she promptly switched her actions with the ghost dragon, transforming its claw into a black hole. Space Annihilation, the 13th ranked absolute technique. Boom. 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 Countless explosions shook the hall, making it feel like doomsday had arrived. The space in the hall also cracked and destabilized more and more with each subsequent explosion. For a moment, it felt like 2 Tier 6 experts were battling here. This exchange greatly stunned Desolate Fury, Thousand Scars, and the others. Had this battle taken place outside the Eternal Realm, the explosions taking place in the hall would have been strong enough to erase an entire map. Is this the power of a dragon? No, this isn't a result of just the dragon's power. It's also because of Vice Guild leader Fry's impressive control. Indeed. Space Annihilation is an incredibly complex technique. Even 5th floor experts have difficulty executing it under normal circumstances, let alone executing it through a non-human body. Yet, Vice Guild leader Fry is executing the technique consecutively. If we're comparing purely in terms of control, Vice Guild leader Fry can already rank among the Red Dragon Nation's top 10. Red Dragon Nation's members grew excited when they saw the ghost dragon manipulated by Fry holding its ground against Manoset. They also grew more confident in defeating the Holy Ancestor. The biggest concern a team faced when raiding a boss monster was whether it had the ability to withstand the boss's attacks. So long as a team had someone or some way to resist a boss's attacks, it would become possible to raid the boss. Previously, the power Manoset displayed was simply terrifying, and their team's ace tank nearly got killed in one hit. If any of the team's other tanks tried to block the Holy Ancestor's attacks, they would most likely be killed on the spot. So, their team essentially had no way of resisting Manoset's attacks. However, now that the ghost dragon under Fry's control had proven itself capable of resisting Manoset's attacks, all they needed to do next was attack the Holy Ancestor with their all. Subsequently, the team's ranged players began bombarding Manoset with attacks from over 100 yards away. Tier 5 skill, Space Breaker. Tier 5 spell, Ice Devourer. Tier 5 taboo skill, Demon King's Rose. Because the Holy Ancestor could not move and was busy defending himself from the ghost dragon's attacks, he could only let the numerous Tier 5 skills and spells batter his body. -3,465,424. -5,541,746. -7,465,471. Everyone froze when they saw the damage they did to the Holy Ancestor. Impossible. My Tier 5 taboo skill only caused 7 million damage? Did the compounding potion's effects expire? Everyone couldn't believe their eyes when they saw how little damage they had caused to Manoset. Previously, even when they fought against the legendary-ranked devouring earth dragons, their attacks still managed to cause damage nearing 100 million. Meanwhile, the devouring earth dragons were only slightly inferior to dragons of the same tier regarding defense. Yet, when they used the same attacks against Manoset, none managed to cause more than 10 million damage to the Holy Ancestor. The damage they caused wasn't even a fraction of Manoset's battle recovery, let alone Manoset's 1.5 trillion HP pool. At this rate, even if Manoset simply stood there and took their attacks, he would still be perfectly fine after 100 years. As expected of a holy ancestor. Not even Tier 6 dragons have such a high defense. Shifeng was also a little astonished when he saw Manoset's defense. Although members of the holy race typically had very high defense due to the improvements provided by holy power, this was the first time Shifeng had seen a member of the holy race having such an absurdly high defense. This won't do, Vice Guild Leader. The boss's defense is simply ridiculous. There's no way we can deal enough damage to kill him, unrestrained Lionheart said, the corner of his eyes twitching as he silent cast Tier 5 spells one after another. Fry also fell into thought as she manipulated the ghost dragon. Although she had long known that Manoset wouldn't be an easy foe to defeat, she didn't think the holy ancestor would be this frightening. Not only did Manoset have HP greater than Tier 5 dragons, but he even had defense greater than Tier 6 dragons. The rest is up to you now, Guild Leader Black Flame, Fry anxiously said as she looked at Shifeng. Now that they had a way to block Manoset's attacks, the next biggest problem they needed to resolve was how to deplete the holy ancestor's HP. If they couldn't even overcome the holy ancestor's battle recovery, defeating him would be a pipe dream. However, Shifeng was only a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Fry found it truly hard to imagine what methods Shifeng could possibly come up with to deplete Manoset's HP. In response to Fry's words, Shifeng nodded and walked up to Manoset. What is Brother Black Flame trying to do? Desolate Fury couldn't help but grow worried when he saw Shifeng moving within 100 yards of Manoset. There's no way to dodge the boss's punches at such close range, and even one of those punches is enough to KO a Tier 5 tank. I can't see any other options. Ranged attacks are already proven useless, LaRoja said while firing arrows at the holy ancestor. Guild Leader Black Flame should have a way to block the boss's punches, so he's probably thinking of testing the effectiveness of melee attacks. Melee attacks. When White Owl overheard LaRoja's assessment, her curiosity was piqued, and she began observing Shifeng's every action closely. Not to mention, as a melee player, she didn't have anything better to do right now. Manoset's punches were simply overwhelming. Not only did the holy ancestor's punches carry immense power, but they also possessed frightening speed. Outside 100 yards, it was still possible for Tier 5 players like herself to react to the punches in time and take appropriate countermeasures. However, within 100 yards, they would be struck without fail. Subsequently, as Shifeng moved closer and closer to Manoset, the holy ancestor finally shifted his attention to him and threw out numerous punches. Seeing this, Shifeng promptly raised the Winter of Eternal Night. Holy Mana's shadow. Suddenly, a cloud of crimson mist appeared around Shifeng, enveloping him completely. Then, in the blink of an eye, a 10-meter-tall swordsman covered in holy runes emerged from the cloud of crimson mist. The instant this giant of a swordsman appeared, everyone present involuntarily shuddered as an indescribable sense of pressure enveloped them. For a moment, it felt as if a god had appeared in the hall. Immediately afterward, one of Manoset's punches could be seen connecting with the giant swordsman. However, the punch simply passed through the swordsman without accomplishing anything. Subsequently, the giant swordsman began moving across the air at unbelievable speeds, rapidly evading Manoset's punches one after another. Flowing Space's first step, stepping space. How fast? Death Omen's eyes widened her eyes in shock when she saw that the giant swordsman had already arrived in front of the holy ancestor. The swordsman had crossed a distance of several dozen yards in the blink of an eye. This speed was already enough to rival a Tier 6 assassin using an advanced silver combat technique. However, Death Omen could clearly feel that the swordsman's life rating was nowhere near the Tier 6 standard. Disappear, Ant. When Manoset saw Shifeng appearing before him, he sneered and abandoned all defense against the ghost dragon, opting to send a rain of punches at Shifeng. Holy annihilation. Without hesitation, Shifeng executed his strongest move against Manoset's barrage of punches. Boom! Space within the hall became devastated, and the barrage of punches disappeared as Manoset was sent stumbling backward and nearly falling to the ground. At the same time, an unbelievable damage value appeared above his head. -84,654,841. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3388, Chapter 462, Final Strike. Chapter 3388, Chapter 462, Final Strike. Chapter 462, Final Strike. Is he human? Am I hallucinating? What kind of damage is that? Could he be a Tier 6 sword god? Is this his trump card? Everyone couldn't help but wonder if they were hallucinating when they saw the damage value of more than 80 million. Even Fry had momentarily forgotten to control the ghost dragon. Previously, no matter what kind of attacks they used against Manoset, none of them managed to deal over 10 million damage. Even when unrestrained Lionheart landed a Tier 5 curse directly on Manoset's body, he only managed to cause around 7 million damage. It should be known that a Tier 5 curse was comparable to Tier 6 spells in power. Yet, the curse only dealt about 10% of the damage Shifeng's attack did. Moreover, that was only because Shifeng had used his attack to block Manoset's attack. If Shifeng managed to land a direct hit on the Holy Ancestor, the damage he could cause would be devastating. While everyone was still in shock, Shifeng, in his reconstructed body composed of mana and holy power, swung his sword again. Holy Annihilation. Because of Fry's ghost dragon pinning Manoset this time, Shifeng was able to connect his attack with Manoset's body, the Holy Ancestor wincing a little when Shifeng's sword cut through his body. -1,218,654,651. Shifeng's attack caused Manoset's HP bar to experience a visible drop this time. Upon seeing this, everyone present gasped. Crap! What is this damage? That's already more than our entire team did to the boss. Is this the strength of a saint? No way. I doubt even saints can have such frightening damage. No wonder the Vice Guild leader is willing to hire him at such a costly price. Had we entered God mode with him, we would have definitely secured the first clear. When everyone saw Shifeng's second attack dealing 1.2 billion damage, they felt shocked and joyful. At the same time, they became more confident in bringing down Manoset. Is that all he has for his trump card? Different from everyone else, Fry frowned when she saw the decrease in the Holy Ancestor's HP. Shifeng's attack might seem impressive for causing 1.2 billion damage, but it was still nothing compared to Manoset's 1.5 trillion HP. With his battle recovery, Manoset could recover 30 billion HP every 5 seconds. That was equivalent to regenerating 6 billion HP every second. But just when Fry was feeling uneasy, Shifeng suddenly appeared behind Manoset and stabbed the Holy Ancestor with the Shadow Incinerator. The end. With death as the price, incite all of the Shadow Incinerator's power to deal a devastating blow. This was Shifeng's strongest trump card, and it was also the only method he had to raid Manoset successfully. The Shadow Incinerator was a godly relic. During his previous life, the weapon had allowed the strongest demigod to slay an ancient god. Although Manoset was a holy ancestor, an existence comparable to primordial gods, he was currently weakened by the Goddess of Space's seal, and his life rating was only at the level of a Tier 5 holy god. So long as Shifeng could heavily injure Manoset, defeating the holy ancestor wouldn't be a dream. Otherwise, with their current team, even if they increased the team's size by tenfold, it'd still be impossible to kill Manoset. Initially, during the early phases of the war between the holy race and the human race in his previous life, human players were utterly powerless against the holy race's holy gods. It didn't matter even if numerous Tier 6 human experts worked together. They simply couldn't overcome the frightening defense and HP of the holy gods. However, later on, human players found an effective way to take down holy gods, and that was by heavily injuring them. So long as a holy god became heavily injured, they would lose the ability to strengthen their body with holy aura. Without holy aura, a Tier 6 holy god's defense would become weaker than even that of Tier 6 divine monsters, and their basic attributes would also plummet. The only problem with this strategy was that human players first needed to overcome the frightening defense of a holy god to injure them heavily. Meanwhile, the requirement to do so was much greater than the requirement to heavily injure a divine monster. Please let this succeed. Shifeng prayed when he ran the Shadow Incinerator through Manoset's heart. Boom! Suddenly, the space surrounding Manoset transformed into purgatory, and even the ghost dragon, which was swinging its claw to attack Manoset, had lost its claw. Roar! Immediately afterward, everyone heard an agonizing cry coming from Manoset, the powerful sound waves the holy ancestor produced causing unrestrained Lionheart and the others to stumble over a dozen yards backward. A short moment later, the flames surrounding Manoset disappeared and revealed a dark void. The result of Shifeng's attack was even more devastating than Manoset's punch before the holy ancestor was weakened to tier 5. What did he do? Mutual destruction? Is he crazy? Everyone's eyes widened in shock when they saw only one figure standing amidst the void. At this time, Manoset was in a miserable state as he stood in the middle of the void. The holy ancestor's body was covered in severe burns, and the gaping hole in his chest. His life rating had also plummeted even further, a sign that he had been heavily injured. Even his HP had undergone a shocking change. Manoset, heavily injured, holy ancestor, tier 5, level 148 HP 750 billion. However, while Manoset might have entered a heavily injured state, Shifeng had also disappeared, leaving behind only a ring in his place. He must be insane. He chose soul annihilation just to injure a boss. Unrestrained Lionheart was flabbergasted when he failed to sense Shifeng's presence. Unlike the average player, unrestrained Lionheart had a powerful perception toward souls. This allowed him to easily distinguish the state of a player's soul when they died. Hence, he could tell that Shifeng's immortal soul had disappeared after detonating himself to heavily injure the holy ancestor. When players died a normal death, their immortal souls would not suffer any damage whatsoever. Only when players were killed by a tier 5 attack or above would their immortal souls suffer some permanent damage. Even so, their immortal souls would remain in existence after death. However, should a player suffer soul annihilation, nothing would be left of their immortal soul once they died. Meanwhile, soul annihilation to a player was equivalent to a permanent farewell from God's domain. This was an outcome worse than any penalty players could receive for failing a quest in God's domain. After all, the worst penalty a quest could give was to have players start over with a new account. However, if a player suffered soul annihilation, they wouldn't even get the chance to start over again. No, he's still alive, Fry said as she lifted her head and looked at the space above the ring Shifeng had dropped after his death. There, the figure of a person was slowly materializing. What? He had such an item on him? Unrestrained Lionheart was given another huge surprise when he saw Shifeng resurrecting. Although many items in the Greater God's domain could let players resurrect on the spot, items that could let players avoid a true death were extremely rare and valued as much as legendary equipment. Even Fry had only received one such item from the Red Dragon Nation after rising to the position of Vice Guild leader. Meanwhile, when White Owl saw Shifeng resurrecting above the ring he dropped, she couldn't help but reveal a wry smile. Others might not know where Shifeng had gotten that death prevention tool from, but as one of the Paimon conglomerate's 10 great paragons, White Owl couldn't be any more familiar with it. The sacred phantom ring. It was a priceless treasure that could allow its wearer to avoid true death once a day. It was a top-tier treasure, even among the many life-saving treasures in the Greater God's domain. Even though it was only a fragmented legendary item, its life-saving capabilities were no weaker than a legendary-ranked life-saving item. Originally, the sacred phantom ring was a treasure the Paimon conglomerate had prepared for the Divine Seal Saint. However, the Divine Seal Saint had given it to his youngest son Dira, who had ended up losing it to Shifeng. Good. It worked. After resurrecting, when Shifeng saw Manoset's chilling state, a look of joy appeared in his eyes. Immediately, he commanded, "Quick! Everyone attack the boss now. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3389, Chapter 463, World Modes First Clear? Chapter 3389, Chapter 463, World Modes First Clear? Chapter 463, World Modes First Clear? Upon seeing Shifeng pick up the sacred phantom ring and hearing his command, everyone promptly snapped out of their dazes and went into action. Nobody present was a fool, so everyone understood that this was a crucial opportunity. But will this really work? Unrestrained Lionheart wondered skeptically. Even though Manoset was currently looking pale and breathing heavily, unrestrained Lionheart still couldn't help but have his doubts about defeating the Holy Ancestor. It was indeed astonishing that Shifeng could heavily injure Manoset. If he had used that same attack against a Tier 6 tank, the latter would most likely have been killed on the spot, even with a life-saving skill activated. Only, while Manoset might be heavily injured, nothing had really changed for the team. Firstly, while it was true that boss monsters couldn't actively recover from a heavily injured state, the negative state would only last for a very limited time. It was why teams would typically only heavily injure a boss monster when the boss in question had gone berserk. Secondly, Manoset was ridiculously durable. Even in a heavily injured state, the Holy Ancestor still had 750 billion HP. That was more than what a level 148, Tier 5 dragon possessed. While Manoset could no longer benefit from the battle recovery effect, it would still take the team a long time to deal 750 billion damage, and time was a privilege they couldn't afford. However, despite his concerns, unrestrained Lionheart did not dawdle in his actions. Immediately, he activated a berserk skill and began casting a threefold Tier 5 spell. At the same time as unrestrained Lionheart was preparing his attack, the Tier 5 rangers of the team also activated their berserk skills and bombarded Manoset with arrows. The ghost dragon that had lost a claw also opened its maw. Tier 5 skill, Heaven's Rain. Tier 5 skill, Soul Chaser. Tier 5 skill, 9-in-1. Dragon Breath. The ghost dragon's breath attack carried power rivaling Tier 5 curses. So, Manoset had no choice but to defend against the attack with his fists. This led to more than 200 arrows landing directly on his body. Minus 116,134,523. Minus 214,764,212. Minus 124,891,591. Upon seeing the series of damage values appearing above Manoset's head, everyone present couldn't help but be stunned. Am I hallucinating? Every arrow's dealing over 100 million damage? Is the system bugged? Previously, when the team's Tier 5 rangers attacked Manoset, each of their arrows could only deal several million damage. Yet, now, each arrow was dealing over 100 million damage, and the entire volley of arrows had caused the Holy Ancestor to lose nearly 20 billion HP. All of a sudden, the goal of dealing 750 billion damage no longer looked as out of reach as it did previously. It's doable. The raid's doable. The melee players standing at the forefront grew ecstatic. Immediately, they sped up their charge toward Manoset so that they could quickly get in on the action as well. It seems we should also stop withholding our strength. When Death Omen saw the damage dealt by the rangers, she promptly activated Shadow's power, a berserk skill that doubled her strength and agility and improved her reaction speed by 30%. Thousand Scars also followed suit and activated her berserk skill Divine Flame. Immediately, the two daggers she wielded transformed into scorching flames that behaved like serpents, the flame serpents attacking Manoset and causing damage in the tens of millions. Although each of Thousand Scars' attacks didn't deal as much damage as the Tier 5 ranger's arrows, her high attack speed allowed her to match the ranger's damage output. Meanwhile, once the team's melee players started landing attacks on Manoset, the team's overall damage output more than doubled. Even though Manoset was wildly flinging punches, as the power of his punches couldn't even reach the Tier 6 standard right now, they were of no threat to the Tier 5 players present. At most, the punches only let him block a portion of the incoming attacks. 76%. 52%. 33%. Manoset lost dozens of billions of HP with every round of attacks he suffered, which resulted in his HP bar decreasing by visible chunks. However, the lower the Holy Ancestor's HP fell, the slower the decrease became. Faster. Faster. We need to be faster. When Shifeng saw Manoset's punches becoming faster and stronger, he knew that the Holy Ancestor would soon recover from his heavily injured state. Meanwhile, once Manoset recovered, it would be a pipe dream for their team to defeat him. When Manoset's HP fell to 25%, The gaping hole in his chest had already recovered by 90%, and a silver heart had started to take shape in the hole. Ha ha ha. When Manoset saw that he was close to fully recovering, he laughed and stopped defending against the incoming attacks. Instead, he scanned the players before him with a contemptuous gaze, causing everyone to experience unprecedented intimidation. Holy art, splitting star. After Manoset let out a loud roar, a gigantic illusory fist smashed down on the hall like a falling star. Partway through its descent, the star split into countless meteorites that carried as much power as the Holy Ancestor's punches. Seeing this, Shifeng promptly stopped holding back. The winter of eternal night in his hand unleashed a dark aura that enveloped its surroundings. Radiant Night. Sword's orbit. Under Radiant Night's effect, every one of Shifeng's attacks carried power at the Tier 6 standard and dealt damage in the hundreds of millions to Manoset. While executing Sword's orbit, Shifeng could land over 30 attacks on the Holy Ancestor every second, which translated to more than 10 billion damage every second. 25%. 23%. 21%. As Manoset's HP fell, the number of players killed by the descending meteorites also increased. 80. 62. 45. In only a few seconds, the team lost over 40 players. Of the team's surviving members, only those at the 5th floor standard could dodge the rain of meteorites perfectly. As for titled experts, they could only pray that they weren't targeted by more than 2 meteorites at a time. Otherwise, unless they were a tank, they would be killed on the spot. Is it still not enough? Shifeng couldn't help but feel disappointed when he saw that the team had less than 30 members remaining and that Manoset had recovered from his heavily injured state. Currently, Manoset still had 20% of his HP remaining. With fewer than 30 players on the team, they wouldn't be able to defeat the Holy Ancestor even if he was still heavily injured. So, it'd be even more impossible to defeat Manoset now that he was no longer heavily injured. This is the end of the line for you ants, Manoset said, his body seemingly growing a little larger after he had recovered from his injuries. Then, he sent a flurry of punches at Shifeng and the others. Sure enough, it's a failure. Fry sighed deeply when she saw the wall of punches coming at her. However, just as everyone thought the wall of punches would devour them, the goddess's shadow, who had been maintaining the seal on Manoset all this time, suddenly moved. You've done well to weaken Manoset to such an extent, heavens blessed, the goddess's shadow said as she raised her hands. Immediately, eternal energy flooded the hall, and the space around Manoset began to twist and shrink rapidly, forcing the Holy Ancestor to shrink with it. In the blink of an eye, Manoset's 10-meter-tall body was reduced to just 1 meter, then to the size of a rice grain, and ultimately to an indiscernible speck. This scene dumbfounded everyone in the hall. He's dead. Shifeng was similarly stunned by Manoset's abrupt disappearance. A Holy Ancestor, an existence comparable to primordial gods, was eliminated, just like that. Before Shifeng could come back to his senses, a series of system notifications sounded in everyone's ears. System, congratulations. You have cleared the World Mode Courtyard of Space and completed the Goddess of Space's Seal event. Regional System Announcement. Congratulations to Red Dragon Team for obtaining the first clear on the World Mode Courtyard of Space. Rewarding plus 100 regional city reputation points and plus 200 regional town reputation points. For a time, unprecedented silence enveloped the entire Corrosion Mountain range. Faster. Faster. We need to be faster. When Shifeng saw Manoset's punches becoming faster and stronger, he knew that the Holy Ancestor would soon recover from his heavily injured state. Meanwhile, once Manoset recovered, it would be a pipe dream for their team to defeat him. When Manoset's HP fell to 25%, the gaping hole in his chest had already recovered by 90%, and a silver heart had started to take shape in the hole. Ha ha ha. When Manoset saw that he was close to fully recovering, he laughed and stopped defending against the incoming attacks. Instead, he scanned the players before him with a contemptuous gaze, causing everyone to experience unprecedented intimidation. Holy art, splitting star. After Manoset let out a loud roar, a gigantic illusory fist smashed down on the hall like a falling star. Partway through its descent, The stars split into countless meteorites that carried as much power as the holy ancestors' punches. Seeing this, Shifeng promptly stopped holding back. The winter of eternal night in his hand unleashed a dark aura that enveloped its surroundings. Radiant Night. Sword's Orbit. Under Radiant Night's effect, every one of Shifeng's attacks carried power at the Tier 6 standard and dealt damage in the hundreds of millions to Manoset. While executing Sword's Orbit, Shifeng could land over 30 attacks on the Holy Ancestor every second, which translated to more than 10 billion damage every second. 25%. 23%. 21%. As Manoset's HP fell, the number of players killed by the descending meteorites also increased. 80. 62. 45. In only a few seconds, the team lost over 40 players. Of the team's surviving members, only those at the 5th floor standard could dodge the rain of meteorites perfectly. As for titled experts, they could only pray that they weren't targeted by more than 2 meteorites at a time. Otherwise, unless they were a tank, they would be killed on the spot. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3390, Chapter 464, Astonishing Rewards. Chapter 3390, Chapter 464, Astonishing Rewards. Chapter 464, Astonishing Rewards. Outside the courtyard of space. World Mode got cleared. Nobody has even seen God Mode's final boss yet, so how is it possible that someone has already cleared World Mode? Could World Mode actually be easier than God Mode? No way. I heard from some people who had entered World Mode, and they say that even the fodder monsters there are legendary ranked Earth Dragons. There are also countless spatial blades randomly flying about the courtyard, and every spatial blade can easily kill Tier 5 players. The difficulty of fighting legendary monsters in such an environment is simply ridiculous. That's vastly more challenging than what players have to face in God Mode. Easier than God Mode? What nonsense are you talking about? I've entered World Mode, and I can tell you that titled experts can't even survive 10 seconds without working together in groups of 10 or more. When everyone outside the courtyard of space received the system announcement, they couldn't help but look at the now sealed teleportation gate in a daze. Many of the players present had entered the God Mode courtyard of space, so they knew how challenging the team dungeon was. It was unlike any God Mode team dungeons found outside the Eternal Realm. Hence, they couldn't help but find it unbelievable that someone had conquered the courtyard of space's World Mode, which was supposedly a greater difficulty setting than God Mode. How can the dungeon's World Mode get conquered? The Rockspear St. Parker was in utter disbelief as he stared at the system announcement displayed before him. This is bad, Lord Morrow. We don't even know which team has conquered the dungeon right now, the Wind Saint Desert Web said to Morrow. In order to secure the World Mode courtyard of space's first clear, Morrow had recruited the help of the experts working under the guild's Grand Elders. However, as these experts were operating in different regions in the Eternal Realm, Morrow had to make many promises to the Grand Elders to get these experts to abandon their ongoing tasks to come and help him. Yet, now, someone else had conquered the World Mode courtyard of space before these experts could even enter the dungeon. Once the Grand Elders learned of this, they would definitely reprimand him for this failure. The Red Dragon Nation's current guild leader was about to conclude his term. As the Red Dragon Nation was a pseudo-apex power, the position of guild leader came with a lot of precious resources and influence in the greater god's domain. Hence, every vice guild leader was eyeing the position, resulting in intense competition. Now that Morrow had wasted the precious development time of many of the guild's experts in the Eternal Realm, the guild's other vice guild leaders would definitely use this opportunity to make trouble for him. They might even snatch his authority in the Eternal Realm. However, contrary to Desert Web's assumption, Morrow did not explode into a flying rage. Instead, he remained very calm, behaving as if this matter had nothing to do with him. "What are you panicking for?" Morrow nonchalantly said. Then, he turned to look at the teleportation gate, his expression darkening a little as he smiled and said, "Even until now, Fry's team has yet to come out of the dungeon. Don't you find this situation very interesting? Do you mean to say that..." Desert Web's mouth gradually widened in disbelief as he processed Morrow's words. Vice Guild Leader Fry's team secured World Mode's first clear? Otherwise, how do you explain this situation? Pointing at the teleportation gate, Morrow said, according to the general rules of dungeons, so long as a team gets annihilated in a dungeon, the whole team will get resurrected outside the dungeon. Seeing as Fry's team has yet to come out even until now, it goes without saying that they are the ones who have secured World Mode's first clear. Fry's team secured World Mode's first clear? When Parker overheard Morrow's words, he held his head with both hands and instinctively denied Morrow's claim. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Parker knew better than anyone what kind of standard Fry's team members possessed. The number of fifth-floor experts on Fry's team didn't even amount to half of the fifth-floor experts on Morrow's team. If Morrow's team couldn't even conquer the God Mode Courtyard of Space, how could Fry's team possibly secure the World Mode Courtyard of Space's first clear? This was the first clear of a World Mode team dungeon they were talking about. Currently, the World Mode Courtyard of Space was receiving a lot of attention from the Red Dragon Nation's Grand Elders. Whoever secured the World Mode dungeon's first clear was bound to receive more support from those Grand Elders, which would, in turn, increase their chances of winning in the competition for the position of Guild Leader. Meanwhile, so long as Fry became the Red Dragon Nation's next Guild Leader, the experts under her would have a very bright future ahead of them. At that time, even the Guild's elders would have to behave respectfully around them. If that really is the case, what should we do next, Lord Morrow? Desert Webb asked anxiously. If Fry did secure the World Mode Courtyard of Space's first clear, it went without saying the Guild's Grand Elders would give their support to her. At that time, how was Morrow supposed to compete against her for the position of Guild Leader? Don't worry. Fry securing the first clear is good news for us, Morrow said, suddenly smiling. Good news. Desert Webb revealed a confused expression. Look at the other players here, including the Holy Races players. Smiling, Morrow asked, do you think they'll spare Fry's team? This is the Greater Gods Domain's first World Mode team dungeon we are talking about. The rewards for the dungeon's first clear are bound to be incredible. If Fry wants her team to leave this place alive, she'll have no choice but to rely on us. Desert Webb scanned their surroundings when he heard Morrow's words. Then, realization quickly dawned on him. When the system announcement first appeared, everyone was indeed shocked by the news. Now, though, only greed existed on everyone's faces. Items obtained from a dungeon would drop on death in the first 2 hours. Meanwhile, once a dungeon's final boss was killed, players could only stay in the dungeon for an additional 30 minutes. Afterward, they would be forcibly teleported out of the dungeon. Hence, so long as they sealed off the dungeon's entrance and killed the players who came out of the dungeon, they would be able to obtain the dungeon boss's loot. All we need to do is stand aside and watch the show, Morrow said as he walked to a corner to rest. At the same time, the members of the various powers gathered outside the teleportation gate started to act. Even the Holy Races players had taken the initiative to establish cooperation with the various human powers. Meanwhile, inside the Courtyard of Space, less than 30 figures sat slumped on the floor of an ancient hall, their eyes lighting up in surprise and joy as they looked at the system notifications before them. We did it. We got the first clear. This is the first clear reward for World Mode. Thousand Scars, Desolate Fury, and the others couldn't help but shout out in excitement when they saw the Holy Ancestor disappearing completely. System, congratulations. You have received a Goddess treasure chest for completing the Goddess of Space's seal event. The reward is so generous. Unrestrained Lionheart was greatly shocked as he looked at the treasure chest in his hand. Although he didn't know what rank of treasure chest the Goddess treasure chest belonged to, seeing as it was made entirely of 7 luminaries crystals, its value must rival legendary treasure chests. It should be known that legendary treasure chests were extremely rare in the Greater Gods Domain. Even God Mode team dungeons would only occasionally drop one. Yet, now, the World Mode Courtyard of Space had awarded every team member with 1 Goddess treasure chest. Moreover, this was in addition to the items gradually descending from the ceiling. The rewards were so lucrative that it felt as if they had just raided 100 God Mode team dungeons. However, unlike everyone else, Shifeng's attention wasn't on the Goddess treasure chest. Instead, his gaze was focused on items descending from the ceiling, a flash of surprise appearing in his eyes when he saw what the Holy Ancestor had dropped. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3391, Chapter 465, Goddess's Treasure. Chapter 3391, Chapter 465, Goddess's Treasure. Chapter 465, Goddess's Treasure. Mr. Blackflame, you don't seem very interested in the goddess treasure chest, unrestrained Lionheart commented when he noticed Shifeng paying more attention to the items dropped by the Holy Ancestor than the goddess treasure chest in his hand. It is only thanks to your leadership that we managed to secure the world mode courtyard of space's first clear. How about I ask Vice Guild Leader Fry for permission to exchange one of the boss's dropped items for your goddess treasure chest? That won't be necessary. 2 items are enough for me, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Treasure chests such as the goddess treasure chest were also known as divine treasure chests. Meanwhile, the value of a divine treasure chest could range anywhere from an inferior legendary treasure chest to an inferior mythical treasure chest. Although Shifeng had no idea how powerful the goddess of space was exactly, after seeing how powerful the goddess's doppelganger was, he was certain that the goddess was vastly stronger than the average ancient god. Hence, it wouldn't be surprising if the rewards inside the goddess treasure chest rivaled that of legendary treasure chests in value. The only downside of divine treasure chests was that each chest would only contain 1 item. However, even if it was only 1 item, it was still a precious item from a legendary treasure chest equivalent. So, it wouldn't be any worse than the items dropped by the Holy Ancestor. After all, the Holy Ancestor they killed here was heavily suppressed. Moreover, they had even relied on the goddess's shadow to deal the finishing blow. In terms of value, the Holy Ancestor's loot would, at best, rival the loot of an ordinary Tier 6 holy god. When Shifeng finished speaking, many people in the hall had already opened the goddess treasure chest they received. Suddenly, silence enveloped the entire hall, which was followed by bursts of exclamations. Heavens! A secret treasure! I got a secret treasure from my treasure chest. A gold combat technique legacy? I must be hallucinating. I actually got a one-time opportunity to experience a gold combat technique. Everyone who had opened their goddess treasure chest couldn't help but gasp when they saw the contents of their respective chests. Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja, in particular, revealed fanatical expressions. A legacy pearl. This was an item that could allow players to experience the combat technique recorded inside. Meanwhile, the combat technique recorded in their legacy pearls was none other than the gold body technique flowing space. Although the 3 of them were envious of those who had obtained secret treasures, the thought of exchanging their legacy pearls for a secret treasure never crossed their minds. As they had already made some progress in learning the flowing space technique, the legacy pearl was much more valuable to them than any secret treasure. After all the effort they had put in previously, if they could experience the correct way of using flowing space even once, they would have at least a 50% chance of successfully learning the gold body technique and reaching the technique's first level, stepping space. At that time, their combat power would skyrocket, and they'd be able to hold their ground against 5th-floor experts. While they might not become the strongest, they would still be regarded as powerhouses in the Eternal Realm. We really lucked out this time, Big Sis Omen. Both of us actually got combat-ranked secret treasures, Thousand Scars said as she looked at the secret treasure in Death Omen's hands. Then, she looked at her own secret treasure and continued, if I attach this thing to my boots, I'm confident I can hold my ground against holy race experts of the same tier. Death Omen nodded and smiled in response. Originally, she thought that they would merely be working as free labor in this raid. Apart from receiving some town reputation points, they never really thought of obtaining anything else. So, it was a pleasant surprise for them to be able to leave the courtyard of space with a secret treasure. Different from Thousand Scars, Death Omen had obtained a secret treasure for weapons. Although it didn't increase any movement speed like Thousand Scars' secret treasure, it allowed her attack power to undergo a qualitative improvement. A legacy pearl for flowing space? When Shifeng opened his goddess treasure chest and saw the legacy pearl in it, he couldn't help but feel a little joyful. While it was true that secret treasures offered players a more direct improvement to combat power, the value of Flowing Space's Legacy Pearl was easily 10 times greater than any combat-ranked secret treasure. Currently, Shifeng had already achieved the stepping space level, so the flowing space technique he executed was already strong enough to rival ordinary gold body techniques. However, if he could reach the phantom body level, he would fear nobody in the Eternal Realm once he became a Tier 5 Sword Saint. Even if many Tier 6 experts arrived in the future, he was confident he could secure himself a spot in the Eternal Realm. It's a pity that I still haven't perfected my mastery of the stepping space level. Otherwise, I could have used this Legacy Pearl right away and tried to reach the phantom body level. After staring at the Legacy Pearl in his hand for a moment, he ultimately chose to set it aside in his bag, deciding that he would only use the Legacy Pearl once he had perfected his mastery of the stepping space level. Guild leader Black Flame, all of the loot has settled, Fry said, smiling in a happy mood as she pointed at the items scattered on the nearby ground. As per our agreement, you get to choose 2 items first. Okay. After sweeping his gaze across the Holy Ancestor's loot, Shifeng walked over to the items and picked up 2 without hesitation, saying, I'll be taking these 2 items, then. The Holy Ancestor dropped 9 items. Every one of these 9 items radiated a faint trace of eternal energy, so anyone could tell they were extraordinary. Among them, there were weapons, equipment, potions, and designs. There were also 2 secret treasures that radiated an extraordinary aura. Unlike the secret treasures everyone had seen thus far, the 2 secret treasures dropped by the Holy Ancestor were enveloped by a dark purple glow. Based on presence alone, they were clearly a cut above the Orichalcum secret treasure, which was a combat-ranked secret treasure. So, when everyone saw these 2 secret treasures, they couldn't help but salivate over them. If they could attach both of these secret treasures to their equipment, they could probably elevate their mana protection from the Tier 5 standard to the Tier 6 standard. And even if it didn't reach the Tier 6 standard, it would be very close to reaching it. Their combat power would also see a massive improvement. However, Shifeng did not pick even one of the 2 secret treasures for his 2 allotted items. Instead, he had chosen a potion and a feather. The potion was held in a bottle made entirely out of 7 luminaries crystal, and the potion itself was a blood-red liquid with purple-gold sparkles. As for the feather, it looked rather inconspicuous. The feather was the size of his palm, and it was pure white, like an angel's feather. If not for the faint eternal energy it radiated, it could have easily been mistaken for an ordinary item. His not choosing any of the secret treasures? Fry couldn't help but be surprised by Shifeng's choice. In her opinion, although all 9 items dropped by the Holy Ancestor were undoubtedly precious, the value of the 2 secret treasures easily surpassed the combined value of the 7 other items. Yet, Shifeng didn't even glance at the 2 secret treasures that were clearly above the combat rank when he chose the blood-red potion and feather. This was truly a surprising situation. Are you sure you want those 2 items, Guild Leader Black Flame? Fry couldn't help but ask. MHM. Shifeng definitively nodded and smiled. The 2 items he chose might seem ordinary compared to the 2 secret treasures, but they were actually the 2 most valuable items dropped by the Holy Ancestor. Any one of them was easily more valuable than the 2 extraordinary ranked secret treasures combined. The potion he chose was naturally the Divine Spatial Potion, an item that could permanently increase the user's perception of their respective power system by 1 level. As for the feather, it was the famous treasure the Goddess of Space had relied on to spread her name across the 12 sanctuaries in the past. The Feather of Oath. TL notes. 1. Power system is referring to the human's mana system and the holy race's holy power system. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3392, Chapter 466, 12 Wings of Heaven. Chapter 3392, Chapter 466, 12 Wings of Heaven. Chapter 466, 12 Wings of Heaven. Since you've already made up your mind, I will be taking the remaining drops, Guild Leader Black Flame, Fry said, inwardly sighing in relief when she saw the determined look on Shifeng. Although Fry had no idea what use the potion and feather had, She knew that the two extraordinary rank secret treasures were of great importance to her. Each of them was easily more valuable than a legendary weapon. The competition for the Red Dragon Nation's guild leader position was extremely intense. Vice guild leaders would not only be tested on their administration and leadership capabilities, but they would also be tested on overall strength. The strength here referred to individual combat power and background, but out of the two, individual combat power was of much greater significance. After all, if a vice guild leader wasn't sufficiently strong as an individual, it would be hard for them to get the guild's numerous powerhouses to acknowledge them and follow their orders. Not to mention, as the Red Dragon Nation was a pseudo-apex power, the guild's guild leader would be under constant threat of assassination from hostile forces. If a guild leader ended up getting killed, it would greatly impact the Red Dragon Nation's reputation and influence. Therefore, individual combat power was the main criterion for the Red Dragon Nation when choosing a new guild leader. Currently, Fry was still weaker than the veteran vice guild leaders of the guild. Yet, the time for the current guild leader to retire was growing closer and closer. So, she was in urgent need of improving her combat power. If she could receive the bonuses of two extraordinary rank secret treasures, her chances of becoming the Red Dragon Nation's next guild leader would increase substantially. Meanwhile, Shifeng simply chuckled when he saw Fry hurriedly collecting the two secret treasures. Then, he sat down to rest while he appraised the feather in his hand. The Feather of Oath, also known as the 12 Wings of Heaven, while it might not be a divine artifact-ranked weapon or equipment, it was still a bona fide divine artifact. Moreover, it was a divine artifact whose value rivaled the greater god's domain's 10 great divine weapons. In the distant past, the goddess of space had created the Feather of Oath and relied on it to achieve a transcendental position among ancient gods. At one point, she was even suspected of already becoming strong enough to rival primordial gods. However, very few people knew about the Feather of Oath in the current greater god's domain. Shifeng only knew about it because of a primordial god legacy he had obtained during his previous life. Through that primordial god legacy, he learned bits of information regarding the War of Ancient Gods. During that war, the goddess of space had relied on the Feather of Oath to fight a primordial god at the heart of the greater god's domain. Although the goddess of space did not emerge victorious in that fight, she didn't lose, either. Instead, she had fought the primordial god to a stalemate. As a result of that fight, the Feather of Oath's name spread across the 12 sanctuaries. Meanwhile, the reason the Feather of Oath became known as the 12 Wings of Heaven was its ability to summon 12 war goddesses. It was with the help of these 12 war goddesses that the goddess of space could hold her ground against a primordial god. So, when Shifeng saw the Feather of Oath appearing among the items dropped by the Holy Ancestor, he couldn't help but be surprised. In less than a minute, the Feather of Oath's information appeared before Shifeng. Feather of Oath, fragmented divine artifact, an item worn by the goddess of space. It is a treasure created using the souls of 12 heroes from before the Great Destruction. However, the Feather of Oath has suffered serious damage during a fight against 3 holy ancestors, and repairing it will require 6 world sources. Current number of world sources absorbed, 0, additional skill 1 War Goddess Summoning, 4 every 1000 units of 7 Luminaries Crystal expended, summon 1 War Goddess of the same tier, up to tier 6. The war goddesses summoned cannot exceed the summoner by 10 levels. Every war goddess summoned will last for 3 hours. Up to 6 war goddesses can be summoned at the same time. No incantations required. No cooldown. Additional skill 2 Heroic Pledge, expend 1 god crystal to temporarily upgrade a war goddess by 1 tier, up to tier 6. Duration, 30 minutes cooldown, 6 hours. A fragmented divine artifact. Shifeng nearly failed to keep his mouth shut when he saw the Feather of Oath stats. He had long expected the Feather of Oath to be in a damaged state. After all, even if they were talking about the rewards for a World Mode Team Dungeon's first clear, the chances of a legendary item appearing were relatively low. Hence, when he picked up the Feather of Oath, he had already mentally prepared himself to see it being at the legendary rank only. Yet, now, not only was the Feather of Oath at the fragmented divine artifact rank, but it even allowed him to summon up to 6 war goddesses simultaneously. This was simply insane. These were war goddesses they were talking about. Moreover, these weren't just any war goddesses, but war goddesses from before the Great Destruction. While war goddesses only possessed life rating on par with six-winged valkyries, they were existences who had reached the extremes of contemporary combat. Hence, they were titled as war goddesses. What did it mean to reach the extremes of contemporary combat? It meant achieving the standard of gold combat techniques in every movement. Simply imagining an existence with the life rating of a six-winged Valkyrie executing a gold combat technique with their every move sent shivers down Shifeng's spine. Yet, now, he could summon 6 of such existences. Subsequently, time passed bit by bit. After the fallen members of the team were resurrected and everyone rested for about 10 minutes, unrestrained Lionheart followed Fry's instructions and began paying the team's foreign aid their promised compensation. Every foreign aid was given 2 eternal gold coins. In the current eternal realm, where most experts only made several dozen eternal copper a day, a payout of 2 eternal gold was undoubtedly a fortune. When Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja each received 2 eternal gold from unrestrained Lionheart, they couldn't help but be at a loss for words. After all, they had already received an immense harvest from the Courtyard of Space. They didn't think they would receive 2 eternal gold on top of that. Brother Black Flame, please have our share of the compensation. It is only because of you we could secure the World Mode Courtyard of Space's first clear. It is also thanks to you that we had the fortune to join this team. If we keep this compensation on top of enjoying all these benefits, I'm afraid we will be too ashamed to even look at you in the future. Indeed. We are already satisfied with being able to enter the Courtyard of Space and obtain a goddess treasure chest, Guild Leader Black Flame. After exchanging looks with each other, Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja came to a silent agreement with each other and simultaneously shoved the eternal gold coins they received to Shifeng, giving him no chance to even refuse the coins. At this time, unrestrained Lionheart also approached Shifeng and handed him a small pile of coins with a smile, saying, "Here is the remuneration Vice Guild Leader Fry promised and the payment for the 100 bottles of compounding potion, Mr. Black Flame. Your total comes to 14 eternal gold." After a slight pause, unrestrained Lionheart continued, "By the way, the Bloodhell mountain range will soon activate. Would you be interested in joining us to explore it, Mr. Black Flame? We can split the city entrance tokens we obtain evenly." After accepting the coins, Shifeng shook his head and said, "Thank you for the offer, Brother Lionheart. However, I have other matters to tend to, so I'm afraid I cannot join your exploration. With the standard of Fry's team, he would benefit greatly if they evenly split the city entrance tokens they obtained. However, now that he had 20 eternal gold coins in hand, he could accomplish many matters he previously couldn't even dream of accomplishing. Meanwhile, those matters were of far greater importance than a couple of city entrance tokens. Very well, then. Unrestrained Lionheart couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Even so, he didn't insist on the matter. "We should be careful once we leave the dungeon, Brother Lionheart," Shifeng said when he saw that Fry was preparing the team to leave the Courtyard of Space. "We might have secured World Mode's first clear, but the dungeon has already attracted a lot of attention. The people outside are unlikely to let us leave without a fight. You can rest assured, Mr. Black Flame." Confidently, unrestrained Lionheart said, "Vice Guild Leader Fry has long prepared for such an eventuality. Anyone who dares try anything funny will meet a swift end." Shifeng nodded, unsurprised by this revelation. As a Vice Guild leader of a pseudo-apex power, Fry must have long grown accustomed to getting attacked at the entrance of dungeons, so there was no way she came to a dungeon as important as the Courtyard of Space unprepared. He only offered them a reminder so they didn't grow complacent after securing the World Mode Courtyard of Space's first clear. After all, nobody could tell how crazily the various powers would react to the first World Mode Team Dungeon's first clear. Meanwhile, after everyone was rested and ready to go, they stepped into the teleportation gate in the middle of the hall and exited the Courtyard of Space. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3393, Chapter 467, Grand Gathering. Chapter 3393, Chapter 467, Grand Gathering. Chapter 467, Grand Gathering outside the courtyard of space. Following the appearance of numerous bright flashes, the figures of 88 players appeared in front of the cordoned teleportation gate. They're out. Look quickly. Those people finally came out. A burst of noise instantly turned the originally calm basin lively. At this time, over 50,000 human and holy race players could be seen gathered around the teleportation gate. These players formed a tight encirclement around the teleportation gate, and the instant they saw the team of 88 players appearing in front of the gate, excitement and greed colored their eyes. It was as if they had just seen the most tempting treasure in existence, and they couldn't help but get the urge to charge forward and claim this treasure for themselves right away. Meanwhile, when Shifeng and the others appeared outside the courtyard of space and saw the scene before them, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Although it was already nighttime in the Corrosion mountain range, they could still see that players crowded their surroundings. They could also feel the gazes of all these players focusing on them. In a situation where most of these players were fourth-floor experts and above, their deterrence was greater than even that of Tier 6 divine monsters. Are you kidding me? Death Omen's eyes twitched a little when she saw how many players were surrounding them. This is probably what it feels like to be universally condemned, Desolate Fury commented with a wry smile. At this time, even unrestrained Lionheart, who had been full of confidence just a moment ago, had become surprisingly quiet. As a core member of a pseudo-apex power, unrestrained Lionheart was no stranger to battles involving hundreds of thousands of players. After all, such battles were a common occurrence in the greater God's domain. Not to mention, there were even specific battlefields in God's domain that allowed any player to join to experience battles of epic scale. However, while he might have felt some pressure when participating in those large-scale battles, it was nothing compared to what he felt from being stared at by tens of thousands of fourth-floor experts and above. If a person didn't possess a strong will, they'd probably experience a mental meltdown and collapse on the spot if they were put in a similar situation. Meanwhile, after a moment of silence, Shifeng and the others quickly noticed that the players surrounding them were split into 4 camps, 2 for the human players and 2 for the holy race players. After seeing their team exit the dungeon, these 4 camps each sent several representatives to meet them. Greetings, Vice Guild Leader Fry. I have heard many great things about you. I am Mad Blade, the representative of the 4 conglomerates gathered. On behalf of the 4 conglomerates, I would like to congratulate you for securing the World Mode Courtyard of Space's first clear and bringing honor to the human race, a level 142, Tier 5 Tigerkin Berserker from the human player's side said with a smile. Following the Tigerkin Berserker, a level 141, Tier 5 giant carrying a shield on his back also offered his congratulations to Fry, saying, I am moving mountain. On behalf of the 17 guilds gathered, congratulations on conquering the World Mode Courtyard of Space, Miss Fry. Unrestrained Lionheart couldn't help but gasp when he heard the 2 people's introduction. Why are they here? Unrestrained Lionheart muttered in disbelief, sweat rolling down his forehead as he looked at Mad Blade and Moving Mountain. Are they famous, Senior Lionheart? Thousand Scars asked, her curiosity piqued when she saw Unrestrained Lionheart's behavior. They're more than just famous. On behalf of Unrestrained Lionheart, White Owl nervously answered, they are legends who have risen to prominence over a century ago. Both of them are experts who had entered the Luminous Glory List's top 3 when they were young. After reaching Tier 6, they have even fought against many old monsters belonging to the various Apex powers without dying even once. Around 2 decades ago, they were tasked with guarding 2 large-scale saint camps situated at the northern ruins. At the time, anyone who dared to attack them could last no more than 10 moves. Even saints were no exception. I never thought they would show up in this place. Thousand Scars, Desolate Fury, Cross, and La Roja nervously gulped when they heard White Owl's introduction. Saints belonged to the strongest category of players in the Holy World. Yet, even saints couldn't last more than 10 moves against Mad Blade and Moving Mountain. Just what standard had these 2 individuals reached already? It should be known that a saint could easily fight against multiple 5th-floor experts without losing. If Mad Blade and Moving Mountain had the strength to kill a saint in under 10 moves, just one of them could probably annihilate their entire team. At this time, two experts from the Holy Race stepped forward, the approach of these two individuals causing Mad Blade and Moving Mountain to back away a little. Hints of fear had even appeared in Mad Blade's and Moving Mountain's eyes when they looked at the two Holy Race experts. Both of these Holy Race experts looked middle-aged. One looked serious and sharp, while the other was brimming with fighting spirit. However, unlike Mad Blade and Moving Mountain, these two Holy Race experts did not take the initiative to greet Fry. Instead, they simply looked at her indifferently. Hurry up and use the Tier 5 group teleportation scroll, Lionheart. Fry anxiously whispered to unrestrained Lionheart as she kept her eyes on the four experts in front of her. Although she had made ample preparations to fight against even a force of several saints and several hundred fifth-floor experts, she wasn't the least bit confident that her preparations could have any use against these four experts. Others might not know exactly how strong Mad Blade and Moving Mountain were, but Fry did. Not only were the two saints, but they had also created a complete set of exclusive absolute techniques. Typically, most saints and fifth-floor experts who had created exclusive absolute techniques for themselves would only be limited to one of three types: offensive, defensive, or movement. However, Mad Blade and Moving Mountain had created a complete set of exclusive absolute techniques. So, unlike other saints and fifth-floor experts, Mad Blade and Moving Mountain weren't just strong in one aspect but all aspects instead. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they had no weaknesses, at least when it came to combat techniques. However, even more importantly was that both Mad Blade and Moving Mountain were in possession of legendary weapons. If a saint with no legendary weapons like Parker were to fight them, the fight would end as soon as it began. Lionheart? Fry couldn't help but grow confused when she saw no response from unrestrained Lionheart. Meanwhile, after a long silence, unrestrained Lionheart whispered back, "I've been trying to use it the instant they showed up, but the scroll hasn't shown any reaction even until now, it's not responding." Fry quickly scanned her surroundings when she heard unrestrained Lionheart's words, but doing so only confused her even more. But there's no magic barrier here. Based on her knowledge, a teleportation scroll would only fail to activate if the surrounding space was sealed. Meanwhile, a magic barrier was required to seal the space of an area. However, she couldn't even feel any mana fluctuations in the area right now, let alone see a magic barrier. You can stop searching, Miss Fry. Magic barriers aren't the only way to lock down space. You can achieve a similar feat if you have a mana domain of a sufficiently high standard, Moving Mountain said, chuckling. Fry and the others went pale when they heard Moving Mountain's explanation. Although they had long known that saints were individuals who had mastered certain aspects of mana to the extreme, they had never heard of any saint having the ability to lock down space with their mana domain. Following Moving Mountain's explanation, Mad Blade said, "Vice Guild Leader Fry, I am sure you understand why we have surrounded you here. For your own sake, hand over all your gains from the courtyard of space. Otherwise, things won't end with you and your team simply dying once. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3394, Chapter 468, Madman Black Flame. Chapter 3394, Chapter 468, Madman Black Flame. Chapter 468, Madman Black Flame. Mad Blade's words were akin to whispers from hell, causing Fry and her team members to feel as if their feet were entangled in thorny vines, and the only thing they could do was wait for death to claim their lives. Mad Blade, Moving Mountain, you two best not go too far. Aren't you afraid of the Red Dragon Nation's retaliation? Unrestrained Lionheart bellowed in an attempt to shake away his anxiety. Following unrestrained Lionheart's words, all of the players surrounding Fry's team laughed as if they had just heard the funniest joke in the world. Afraid? Of course, we're afraid. Chuckling, Moving Mountain said, "That's why we've all formed alliances. On my side, there is the 100 City Alliance made up of 17 upper-ranking hegemonic powers. On Old Blade's side, there is the Conglomerate Alliance made up of 4 cross-realm conglomerates. Do you think the Red Dragon Nation is a match for our 2 alliances?" Unrestrained Lionheart's and Fry's expressions turned even grimmer when they heard Moving Mountain's words. As for White Owl, Desolate Fury, and the others, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded by this revelation. An alliance between 17 upper-ranking hegemonic powers. An alliance between 4 cross-realm conglomerates. Even when a divine artifact had appeared in the past, such large and powerful alliances had never been formed. Back then, the alliances formed by the various powers would, at most, consist of 5 or 6 upper-ranking hegemonic powers or 2 conglomerates. If 17 upper-ranking hegemonic powers and 4 conglomerates banded together, they could probably put up a fight against even a bona fide apex power. Yet, all these upper-ranking hegemonic powers and conglomerates had banded together just to deal with their team of 88? Are these people insane? Thousand Scars despaired over this situation. It's not like we're trying to monopolize the Eternal Realm. All we did was get the first clear of a world mode dungeon. Is this what Zero Wings members felt when going up against the Paimon conglomerate? Death Omen wryly smiled in this situation, and she couldn't help but resonate with Shifeng's situation when the Paimon conglomerate targeted him in the miniature ancient world. At this time, only Shifeng was unsurprised by the terrifying scene before him. This was also why Shifeng had given unrestrained Lionheart a reminder before they exited the dungeon. Whether it was Thousand Scars or Fry, they had severely underestimated the importance of the world mode courtyard of Space's first clear in the various powers' eyes. More specifically, they had underestimated the desire of the various upper-ranking hegemonic powers and conglomerates to improve their standings in the Greater Gods domain. At present, the power structure in the Greater Gods domain was already fixed. Unless upper-ranking hegemonic powers and conglomerates could produce a heaven-defying individual, they would have no choice but to submit to the various apex powers and pseudo-apex powers for the rest of their continued existence. However, the emergence of the Eternal Realm created an opportunity for the various powers to elevate their status. Be it apex powers or small guilds, everyone would have the same starting point in the Eternal Realm. It was akin to playing on the launch day of a new God's domain. In a situation where everyone understood the significant impact God's domain had on the real world, which power wouldn't go crazy over the Eternal Realm? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that so long as there was an opportunity to gain an advantage, every player and power in the Eternal Realm would do everything they could to secure it. Meanwhile, the rewards of a world mode team dungeon could undoubtedly provide the various powers with a massive advantage. Not to mention, this was also a good opportunity to eliminate a powerful competition. So, there was no way the various powers would give up on such an opportunity. While Fry and the others had fallen into despair and hesitation, a team of several hundred Tier 5 experts was quietly spectating the situation from a distant corner. Meanwhile, standing among these experts was Morrow. "All of our forces are here, Lord Morrow. Should we act now?" Desert Web asked. "If we're too late to act, the 4 alliances might get away with the items." "Don't worry. We still have plenty of time," Morrow said, smiling. "Fry's a stubborn woman. If we want to reap more profits from her, we'll have to wait until she starts to lose team members. If we wait until more than half her team is gone, she might even agree to hand over all of the loot to us in exchange for the rest of her team's survival. If I can get my hands on all the loot, we'll see if any of the Grand Elders will side with her." Parker secretly nodded in agreement with Morrow. He also couldn't help but admire Morrow's insight. Originally, he thought they were finished, and all the glory would be taken by Fry alone. But now, thanks to Morrow's brilliant plan, Fry had become their stepping stone instead. In front of the courtyard of Space's teleportation gate, after scanning the tens of thousands of experts surrounding them, Fry took a deep breath and whispered to Shifeng, "I'm afraid we won't be making it out of here alive, Guild Leader Black Flame. However, their primary target is me. It is my fault for not preparing sufficiently, so I will figure out a way to open a path for you and your friends. At that time, use that opportunity to flee. So long as you can break out of the spatial lockdown's radius, escaping shouldn't be difficult." At this point, Fry was already certain that neither Mad Blade nor Moving Mountain intended to let her and the Red Dragon Nation's members leave. With how many experts there were surrounding them, there was no way the Red Dragon Nation's members could break out of the encirclement and escape, either. The only thing they could do was keep all these experts occupied and hopefully create an opening for those not belonging to the Red Dragon Nation to escape. Would you be willing to make a deal with me, Miss Fry? Instead of answering Fry's suggestion, Shifeng nonchalantly smiled and offered her a different proposal. I can safely get your team out of here in exchange for 200 million star coins. Shifeng's words immediately stunned Fry. Death Omen and Thousand Scars also couldn't help but look at Shifeng in utter surprise. They couldn't believe that Shifeng was still in the mood for jokes despite the situation they were in. Are you sure you're not joking with me, Guild Leader Black Flame? Fry asked, wondering if Shifeng had lost his mind. They were basically at a dead end right now. Moreover, it was one that would result in them getting disqualified from the Eternal Realm. At this moment, she would gladly pay even 1 billion star coins if she could avoid this dead end, let alone 200 million. But could there really be a way out of this situation? Of course not. I'm very much serious, Shifeng said, chuckling. Fry took a long look into Shifeng's eyes and saw that the man, indeed, wasn't joking with her. This led her to remember all the impromptu agreements she had made with Shifeng thus far and how much Shifeng seemed to love money. Honestly, she had no idea whether she should be grateful or angry at him. Although Shifeng was always there to help her in a pinch, he would always ask for large sums of money in return. However, considering their relationship was primarily that of business partners and little of anything else, Fry ultimately sighed and smiled, saying, "Fine. If you can bring us out of here, I'll transfer 200 million to your account as soon as we're safe." Good. That settles it. Shifeng smiled. With this, he would finally have enough money for his training center. At the same time as Shifeng and Fry reached an agreement, Mad Blade and Moving Mountain also overheard their conversation, and they couldn't help but be incensed by what they heard. Shifeng's behavior clearly showed that he thought nothing of them. Moreover, rather than a business talk, it looked more like Shifeng and Fry were flirting. Good. Very good. I want to see how long you can stay arrogant, kid. Mad Blade was both angry and amused by Shifeng's behavior. Immediately, he charged toward Shifeng with his great sword, stirring up a storm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3395, Chapter 469, War Goddess's Initial Appearance. Chapter 3395, Chapter 469, War Goddess's Initial Appearance. Chapter 469, War Goddess's Initial Appearance. Not good. Unrestrained Lionheart panicked when he saw Mad Blade lunging in for an attack. Mad Blade, also known as the Maid Gale Saint, might be a berserker, but he was in possession of the Tigerkin race's strongest bloodline, the Golden Bloodline. As a result, when engaged in melee combat, he possessed explosive speed and power that allowed him to surpass even assassins of the same tier. Currently, there were less than 100 yards separating Mad Blade from Shifeng. This was a distance that even a normal Tier 5 berserker could cover in an instant, let alone Mad Blade. At this distance, there was nothing Unrestrained Lionheart or anyone else on the team could do to help Shifeng. So fast. Standing behind Shifeng, Death Omen and Thousand Scars went wide-eyed, shocked by the speed Mad Blade displayed. Fast. Mad Blade was too fast. Even as Tier 5 assassins, they barely managed to react to Mad Blade's advance. In the time it took them to blink their eyes, Mad Blade had already appeared in front of Shifeng. The berserker was so fast that it was as if he had used a high-tiered teleportation spell. When Tier 5 Grand Wizards used a Tier 5 teleportation spell, while they crossed distances of over 1,000 yards instantly and without any delays, they needed to reorient themselves and adjust their bodies accordingly. Meanwhile, this process required time. Although it would take little time, they must complete this process before taking further action. However, Mad Blade didn't need to do so. Because he had physically crossed the distance between himself and Shifeng in an instant, it was as if he had always stood in front of Shifeng. Meanwhile, as soon as Mad Blade reached Shifeng, the massive greatsword he wielded transformed into a wall of wind that smashed into Shifeng. As the wall of wind covered a large area, facing it was akin to going up against the attacks of 4 Tier 5 combat puppets simultaneously. As expected of a saint who has created a complete set of exclusive absolute techniques. Shifeng dared not take any chances when going up against the wind wall coming at him. Immediately, He activated abyssal power, increasing his defense by 100%, strength by 150%, agility by 60%, physique by 50%, and endurance by 100% for 3 minutes. Then, he swung the Winter of Eternal Night, having it meet Madblade's attack. Radiant Night. Second Sword, Holy Devour. Suddenly, surging flames crashed into the wall of wind. Boom! The collision between the flames and wind created countless spatial rifts in the surrounding area and powerful shockwaves that sent nearby Tier 5 experts flying several dozen yards backward. Subsequently, Shifeng's figure could be seen flying out of the fiery storm and landing in front of the teleportation gate. He then stumbled 3 steps backward before catching his feet. Even after activating abyssal power, Shifeng still lost 66% of his HP from blocking Madblade's attack. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Mad Gale Saint was already close to matching the sealed Holy Ancestor in terms of raw power. "It seems you're not all talk after all," Madblade commented with a sneer when he saw Shifeng still standing. "But this is the end of the line for you." After saying so, Madblade stepped out of the dissipating storm and charged at Shifeng once more. Apart from Fry and a few other experts that rivaled Tier 6 players, nobody else present managed to follow his speed. "Madblade, do you think I'll continue letting you run free?" Fry shouted as she swung the Nethersoul staff. Madblade had acted very suddenly just now, so Fry had failed to react to his attack in time. However, now that she was ready, she naturally wouldn't let the Berserker act as he wished anymore. Immediately, 16 semi-translucent soul annihilation spears flew at Madblade. As these spears were immune to the resistance of space, they flew faster than even a Tier 6 ranger's arrows. Like lightning bolts, they instantly reached Madblade and threatened to bombard him from all directions. "You think you can stop me?" Madblade looked at the approaching soul annihilation spears in contempt. Then, he promptly changed his footwork. Exclusive absolute technique, Phantasm Step. Subsequently, all 16 soul annihilation spears harmlessly passed through Madblade's body as if it was nothing but an illusion. "Black Flame. Run!" Unrestrained Lionheart instinctively shouted when he saw Fry's attack failing to connect. The Phantasm Steps technique was Madblade's trademark move. It was a footwork very close to reaching the Gold Combat technique standard. Once Madblade executed this footwork, even Fry, someone who wielded a fragmented divine weapon, could do nothing to him, and she would have no choice but to teleport away and avoid staying anywhere near Madblade temporarily. Either that or she'd have to waste a life-saving skill to counter the technique. Damn it! Frustration filled Fry when she saw Madblade disappearing. If only she had enough 7 Luminaries crystals on hand. In that case, she'd have access to 2 extraordinary ranked secret treasures to bolster her strength, and she'd have no trouble fighting against Madblade. Meanwhile, a brief moment after Madblade had disappeared from everyone's sight, he reappeared in front of Shifeng. "Let's see how you stay arrogant now, you little punk." After saying so, Madblade executed Wind Barrier, his offensive-type exclusive absolute technique, for a second time. However, the instant Madblade swung his great sword, he could faintly hear Shifeng muttering something to himself. Sure enough, trying to fight Tier 5 old monsters with the strength of a Tier 4 Sword Emperor is still asking for too much. As soon as Shifeng finished speaking, a purple lightning bolt suddenly descended from the skies, threatening to strike Madblade if the Berserker persisted in his frontal assault. However, relying on instincts, Madblade swiftly twisted his body, spinning away from the lightning bolt and smoothly transitioning into attacking Shifeng from the side. Clang! A loud metallic clang echoed across the battlefield. Then, following it was silence. "Who?" Madblade bellowed as he turned to look at the person who stopped his attack. Although he didn't back his side attack with any combat techniques, the attack still carried power at the Tier 6 standard because of his legendary greatsword. It wasn't an attack ordinary Tier 5 experts could casually block. A war goddess. Surprise flashed in Madblade's eyes as he looked at the spear-wielding woman before him. At the same time as Madblade got a good look at the person who had blocked his attack, everyone else present also saw the woman dressed like a holy knight standing in front of Shifeng, protecting him. Immediately, shock and confusion spread. Is this his trump card? A look of surprise flashed in Frey's eyes as she looked at the war goddess, who had suddenly appeared in front of Shifeng. There were some incredibly powerful NPCs in God's domain, and among them were war goddesses. According to rumors, war goddesses had developed their techniques to the extreme and mastered complete sets of gold combat techniques. It was also rumored that war goddesses could fight against dragons of the same tier. However, under normal circumstances, players couldn't even come into contact with such NPCs, let alone summon one to fight for them. Such a feat was as difficult as summoning a dragon to fight for them. So what if you have a war goddess? After his initial surprise, Mad Blade turned to look at Shifeng in contempt. At the end of the day, she is only a level 150, tier 4 war goddess. Do you think she alone can block all of my attacks? War goddesses might be frightening foes to fight against, but that was only if one went up against war goddesses of the same tier or higher. A tier 4 war goddess might be of some threat to Mad Blade, but that wasn't enough to stop him from killing Shifeng. In response to Mad Blade's provocation, Shifeng faintly smiled and asked, if one's not enough, what about 6? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,